Ever get that uncanny feeling, like some moments, some connections, some paths just feel significant, almost like they're meant to be?
Oh, absolutely. It's a really powerful feeling, and it's something that people experience all over the world.
Yeah, and that's the fascinating territory we're exploring today. We're
Hmm.
doing a deep dive into the human belief in destiny.
And our guide for this is a pretty interesting piece of research, an algorithmic analysis of human destiny beliefs.
Right, this algorithmic analysis. What's really intriguing is how it might show us hidden patterns in, how we actually think and talk about this stuff.
Exactly. And what this analysis highlights right away is just how widespread this belief is
Yeah.
across cultures throughout history. It's huge.
It's not some fringe idea then.
Not at all. It seems woven into, well, the fabric of human thought.
Yeah.
The analysis lets us see the scale,
Yeah.
how often these ideas pop up in language.
And the words we use, they're all slightly different, aren't they? Destiny, fate, kismet, predestination. All circling this idea of a life path, but with, subtle differences. And then you've got fatalism, that sort of resignation.
Yeah, and the algorithmic analysis actually digs into that vocabulary. It tries to map how these words connect to different intensities of belief.
So it's looking at how we use the words, not just dictionary definitions.
Precisely. So our mission today is basically to unpack these concepts. We'll use insights from the analysis to get at their origins and, maybe more importantly, why this belief is so persistent. Why does it impact us so much?
Okay, so based on what the analysis found, what are the core ingredients? What makes up this belief in a preordained path?
Well, the analysis points to a few key things that keep coming up. First, this idea of predetermination, that some things are fixed beforehand.
Right.
Then there's often a feeling of limited personal control over those outcomes.
Like it's out of your hands.
Sort of, yeah. Inevitability is another big one, the sense that certain things just have to happen. And finally, the analysis really suggests this whole belief system is crucial for meaning-making. It helps people make sense of things, find significance.
But it's not just, you believe or you don't. The analysis shows more of a range, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It maps out a whole spectrum. On one end, you might have what you could call hard fatalism, people feeling they have zero agency.
Total lack of control.
Right. But then you have much more nuanced views where, yeah, maybe there's a bigger plan, but your actions still matter within it.
Okay, so let's get into some of that terminology. What does the analysis say about the difference between, say, fate and destiny?
Well, the analysis suggests that while we often use them interchangeably, fate tends to pop up more with this idea of an impersonal, unstoppable force.
Like the Greek Moira, just spinning those threads.
Exactly. Relentlessly spinning, regardless of what anyone wants, even the gods sometimes. The language analysis around fate often seems to diminish individual importance a bit.
And destiny.
Destiny, on the other hand, especially when the analysis looks at religious texts, often implies a predetermined outcome, sure, but with more room for human or divine involvement.
So maybe more intention behind it.
Perhaps. It shows up a lot in Abrahamic contexts, often framed as a path intended by God.
That makes sense. Fate feels colder, almost mechanical, while destiny has a bit more purpose, maybe.
What about kismet? That word always feels a bit romantic.
It does, doesn't it? And the analysis actually looks at the emotional tone of the language around kismet. Well, coming from Turkish and Arabic roots, it often describes those seemingly chance encounters or lucky breaks that feel strangely preordained. The analysis finds a strong link between kismet and words expressing surprise, wonder, delight.
Like the universe nudging things along.
Kind of, yeah. And then there's predestination, which the analysis pins pretty firmly to theological discussion.
Right, you hear that mostly in religious contexts.
Exactly. The analysis shows it's huge in Christian theology particularly. The doctrine that God has already decided who gets salvation. Which brings up that massive theological headache, divine knowledge versus human free will.
The classic paradox.
Yeah.
And the analysis shows just how long people have wrestled with this, tracing the linguistic patterns in these arguments over centuries.
It's a real puzzle, but like the analysis highlights, just looking at these different words, fate, destiny, kismet, predestination, shows how complex and personal this whole belief system really is.
Definitely.
Okay, so this isn't a new thing. The analysis points way back to ancient roots.
Oh, way back. This belief is practically universal, dating back to the earliest civilizations. The analysis quantifies this, showing how common these ideas are in ancient texts from all over.
Like where? What are some early examples?
Well, take The analysis of their texts shows a strong belief that the gods controlled everything. Humans use divination to try and figure things out.
Trying to get a hint.
Right, but the ultimate outcomes were seen as pretty much beyond their control. And their view of the afterlife, the land of no return, was quite grim. Not much individual destiny there.
Sounds bleak. What about Egypt? The analysis mentions their concept of shy.
Yes, shy. That was their take on fate, tied to big things like how long you'd live, your social status, your luck. The analysis links shy to specific gods like the Seven Hathors or Meskenet.
So, more personalized forces.
Seems like it. And while it was seen as ordained, the analysis also finds texts suggesting it wasn't totally rigid. Gods could intervene, maybe even politics could shift your shy. There are even hymns asking gods to extend life.
Interesting. So a little more wiggle room there. And then, of course, Greece and the Moirai, the fates. The analysis digs into how they're portrayed, right?
It really does. Clotho, Lachesis, Atropos, spinning, measuring, cutting the thread, super iconic. And what the analysis emphasizes is how inescapable their decrees were seen to be, even for the Olympian gods.
Wow, even Zeus had to listen.
Pretty much. The word moiro itself means allotted portion. But, and this is where it gets interesting, the analysis also finds language about free will and prophecy in the same texts.
So like a contradiction, or just complexity.
Maybe complexity. It's like they had this big framework of fate, but still felt individual choices mattered somehow.
Fascinating. What about other ancient places? What patterns does the analysis show?
It covers a lot. In the Indus Valley, leading into Hinduism, you see an early link to stars and planets evolving into karma.
Right. Actions in past lives shaping the present.
Exactly, through the cycle of samsara. Now, karma sounds deterministic, but the analysis also picks up a strong belief that you can influence your future karma through what you do now.
So choices ripple across lifetimes. Different vibe. What about ancient China? The analysis mentions Ming and Yun.
Yeah, that's a cool duality. The analysis shows Ming is this fixed, unchangeable fate, but Yun was more like flexible luck or fortune.
So some things are set, some you can influence.
Kind of. Together they made up Ming-Yun, destiny. And then there was the mandate of heaven, Tianming, justifying the emperor's rule. Confucius talked about accepting yin. But the analysis also finds tons of evidence for divination and astrology being used to try and understand and navigate Yun.
So acknowledge the fixed stuff, but work with the flexible bits. It's interesting how many cultures, based on the analysis, seem to have this tension.
Absolutely. And the source points out this recurring pattern across Indo-European cultures, too. These trios of female fates, the Norse Norns, Slavic Rosanitsi, others.
Similar figures keep popping up.
Yeah, the analysis notes the linguistic similarities in how they're described. It really underscores how deep these ideas run. And it also shows a shift over time from these personified goddesses towards more abstract ideas later on.
Right, from specific beings pulling the strings to maybe more like cosmic laws or divine plans, which kind of leads us into religious frameworks. The analysis spends a lot of time here, right?
It does. Religions globally has offered structured ways to understand destiny, often linking it to divine will, justice, purpose. The Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they generally talk about divine providence, God's in charge.
But the analysis notes they often distinguish between impersonal fate and a God-guided destiny.
That's a common thread, yes. Destiny often allows for more human agency within God's plan.
Christianity seems to have really wrestled with predestination based on the analysis. Figures like Calvin, Augustine.
Oh, hugely. The analysis of Calvinist texts shows this strong emphasis on God predetermining salvation or damnation right from the start.
That seems tough to square with free will.
Exactly. Thinkers like Augustine, whose writings the analysis covers extensively, tried to bridge that gap. Maybe God's grace nudges us towards good, but doesn't force us. Aquinas argued God predestines out of goodness, but we're still responsible for sin.
So lots of theological gymnastics.
You could say that. The analysis maps out all these intricate arguments, and it even highlights that connection Max Weber made. Maybe the anxiety about being predestined actually fueled early capitalism.
The idea that working hard was maybe a sign you were one of the chosen. Wild.
It's a fascinating, if perhaps counterintuitive, link the analysis helps illuminate. Islam also has a major concept here, qadar, right? Divine decree.
Yes, qadar. Central in Islam, as the analysis of texts confirms. It's the belief that Allah knows and has predetermined everything.
Everything, so no free will. Well, the analysis shows it's usually understood differently. Not as absolute compulsion, but more like Allah setting the boundaries within which humans make choices. Life's a test. Your choices matter, even though Allah knows the outcome. Belief in qadar is very widespread.
Okay. And Judaism, how does the analysis track destiny ideas there?
Early Jewish texts analyzed focus more on Sheol, a kind of shadowy afterlife for everyone. But later, especially with Greek influence, ideas about resurrection, judgment, rewards, and punishments developed. Predestination isn't quite as central as in, say, Calvinism, but the analysis finds a range of views in Jewish thought.
Right. And Buddhism, obviously, karma and rebirth are huge. What does the analysis say about the deterministic side of that?
It explores that, yeah. Karma, driven by intention, shapes future lives in samsara. Yeah. And the idea of dependent arising, pratityasamutpada, everything being interconnected causes and conditions, that carries a lot of deterministic weight.
Seems pretty locked in.
But the analysis also stresses that Buddhist teachings emphasize you can influence your future through ethical action, wisdom. You can break the cycle.
So again, that pattern, cosmic law, but also personal potential. The analysis even looks at traditional African cosmologies.
It does. Many involve a destiny set by spirits or ancestors, sometimes fixed at birth. But the analysis finds nuances too, like the Igbo concept of chi, a personal spirit or destiny, which seems to involve some element of choice.
Oh.
And often there's a belief you can influence things through rituals or interacting with spirits. It shows this interplay between effort and, higher forces. What's really striking, as the analysis shows, comparing all these cultures, is how this core belief persists, even with all the different interpretations.
It really suggests a fundamental human need to grapple with these big questions, finding order, meaning something.
Exactly.
Okay, so how did this belief change as we move from ancient times towards, well, now? The analysis tracks this history, too.
It does. Big shifts. The medieval period in Europe, as the analysis of texts shows, was dominated by those intense predestination debates we mentioned.
Right, lots of theological focus.
Then the Renaissance hits, and you get humanism. Big emphasis on human dignity, potential, self-determination. Thinkers like Pico della Mirandola, analyzed in the source, argued humans could shape their own destiny.
A shift towards human power.
Yeah. Even Machiavelli, very pragmatic, looked at fortune of fate or luck versus human skill and agency.
Okay, so more focus on what we can do. What about the Enlightenment? What does the analysis show there?
Huge turning point. Rationalism, empiricism. They challenge religious authority and divine providence. The analysis of philosophical texts then shows a big focus on natural law, reason, liberty.
So science starts offering other explanations.
Pretty much. Philosophers like Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Locke, Hume, the analysis covers them all. They're grappling with free will versus a potentially deterministic clockwork universe, offering all sorts of different takes.
A major philosophical wrestling match. What about the 19th century? Any key shifts the analysis picks up?
Well, you get romanticism, emphasizing emotion, individualism, a unique personal destiny. And the analysis also points to things like manifest destiny in the U.S.
The idea that national expansion was fated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Shows how these destiny concepts can be grabbed for political purposes, sometimes pretty problematically. The analysis finds examples of this across history.
A reminder that these aren't just abstract ideas. And the 20th, 21st centuries, what trends does the analysis highlight more recently?
You see existentialism pushing back hard against any predetermined essence or fate. Radical freedom, responsibility, Sartre, de Beauvoir.
We make ourselves through choices.
That's the core idea. But at the same time, modern science, quantum mechanics, chaos theory, genetics, epigenetics, all stuff, the analysis cross-references, keeps complicating that whole determinism versus free will debate.
We'll get more into that science bit later.
Right. And despite all these intellectual shifts, the analysis shows that belief in fate, destiny, karma, it's still surprisingly common today.
Wow, it's like this deep human need just keeps the idea alive, even as our understanding of the universe changes. Okay, let's wade into that philosophical maze, free will versus determinism. The analysis identifies this as a central conflict, right?
Absolutely. It's the core tension. Our feeling that we make choices versus the idea that maybe everything, including our choices, is already determined by what came before or by some grand plan. The free will problem.
Okay, let's break down some key terms the analysis flags as important here. Determinism. What exactly is that?
So determinism, as the analysis defines it in this context, is the view that every single event, even our thoughts, is necessitated by prior events plus the laws of nature.
Necessitated, like couldn't happen any other way.
That's the idea, and it's different from fatalism. Fatalism says certain outcomes are unavoidable no matter what you do. Determinism says the whole chain of events leading there is fixed. The analysis often finds it linked to, like, clockwork universe metaphors.
Got it. Not just the end, but the whole journey. And causality, cause and effect, is obviously key here. The analysis must see that everywhere in these arguments.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But even causality gets complicated. Hume famously questioned if we ever really see a necessary connection or just events happening together.
So we just infer it from habit.
That was his point, and the analysis notes how impactful that skepticism has been. Then you have ideas like agent causation, maybe we can start new causal chains, or probabilistic causation, relevant for quantum stuff. Kant even argued causality is how our minds structure experience, not necessarily how the world is.
Okay, that's already getting complex. What about necessity? The analysis mentions different kinds.
Yeah, philosophers talk about logical necessity, things true by definition, physical or causal necessity fixed by physics, moral necessity, maybe certain given character or a divine plan. Arguments for fate often try to show future events are necessary in one of these ways. The analysis tracks how these different types of necessity are used.
Which brings us to logical fatalism. The analysis points to this as a real head-scratcher for free will.
Right. This argument basically says we can't do anything other than what we actually end up doing, just based on logic. The classic is Aristotle's sea battle. If it's true today that a battle will happen tomorrow, then it must happen, right?
Because a statement has to be either true or false.
Exactly. The law of bivalence. It seems to lock the future in place. But the analysis shows philosophers have pushed back.
How? It feels pretty tight logically.
Well, Aristotle himself wondered if statements about future possibilities are really true or false right now. Later guys like Occam, the analysis looks at his work, distinguish between hard past facts, unchangeable past events, and soft past facts, things about the past whose truth depends on the future.
Okay, what's an example?
Yesterday, it was true that I would go to the store today. That's a soft fact. Its past truth doesn't make my going inevitable, like the sun rose yesterday, makes that past event fixed. The analysis highlights this distinction, helps dismantle logical fatalism.
Okay, that helps clarify it. So, given all that, what are the main philosophical camps in this whole debate, according to the analysis?
The analysis outlines a few key positions. First, incompatibilism. This says free will and determinism just can't both be true. They're incompatible.
Okay, pick a side.
Pretty much. Under incompatibilism, you have hard determinism. This says determinism is true, so free will must be an illusion. Thinkers like Spinoza, Dolbach. The analysis looks at their arguments. They often lean heavily on universal causal laws.
So everything's predetermined. Our feeling of choice is just feels.
That's the hard determinist view. Then, on the other side of incompatibilism, you have libertarianism.
Not the political kind.
No, philosophical libertarianism. This says we do have free will, so determinism must be false. This usually requires some randomness or indeterminism in the universe and the idea that we, as agents, have real control. Epicurus' atomic swerve, Robert Kane's modern theories. The analysis examines these.
So real forks in the road, and we genuinely choose, independent of past causes. The analysis probably notes the challenges explaining how that agency works.
Exactly. It's a big hurdle. And then, trying to bridge the gap, you have compatibilism, sometimes called soft determinism.
Okay, trying to have it both ways.
Sort of. Compatibilists argue free will and determinism can coexist. They often redefine free will. It's not about being able to do otherwise in the exact same situation, but more about acting on your own desires without being forced, even if those desires were influenced by past causes.
So if I want to do something and I do it without someone holding a gun to my head, that's free, even if my wanting it was shaped by my past.
That's the basic compatibilist idea. The analysis highlights folks like the Stoics, Hobbes, Locke, Hume, Leibniz as key figures. And it indicates this is a pretty popular view in philosophy today.
Right, and the analysis points out that a lot of this boils down to how you define freedom, necessity, cause.
Absolutely. Compatibilists define freedom in a way that fits a determined world. Incompatibilists insist on a stronger definition needing real alternative possibilities. It's a debate that, as the analysis clearly shows through tracking arguments across millennia, just keeps going.
Definitely not simple. Okay, let's switch gears a bit to the psychology. Why do we seem so drawn to believing in destiny? And how does it affect us? The analysis looks into this too.
It does, yeah. It integrates psychological findings to look at the cognitive mechanics, the biases that might nudge us towards destiny beliefs.
Like what? What mental shortcuts might be involved? The analysis mentions a few.
Well, attribution theory suggests we tend to blame external things, like fate, for really big or unusual events. Then there are specific biases. The analysis flags.
Not just.
One is what the source calls the destiny instinct, this sort of built-in tendency to see life events as predetermined, not just down to our choices.
Can be comforting, I guess. Or make you passive.
Both, potentially. Then there's the just world fallacy, believing people get what they deserve. Fate or cosmic justice often gets invoked here to explain why good or bad things happen. The analysis finds this bias popping up a lot when people explain inequality.
Right, which can lead to blaming victims, unfortunately. The analysis probably sees that in the language used.
Definitely. And hindsight bias, I knew it all along.
Yeah.
Makes past events seem inevitable, reinforcing that meant-to-be feeling.
Makes sense.
The source also brings up Jesse Baring's idea, linking our theory of mind, understanding others' minds, to belief in souls, afterlife, and destiny. Like we project agency onto the universe. The analysis finds language links between agency and fate that might support this.
Interesting connection.
Fundamentally, though, believing in destiny can tap into our deep needs for meaning and control, especially when things feel uncertain or chaotic. It provides a story, an explanation.
Like our brains are pattern finders, and destiny is a big, overarching pattern. How does this belief actually play out emotionally? Does it help us cope? The analysis looks at these functions.
It does, and it's complex. On one hand, believing fate is totally fixed can lead to resignation, less motivation. Why bother if it's all decided?
Yeah, the fatalistic trap.
But the analysis also highlights what you might call agency within fate, believing you can still act meaningfully within a larger plan. This seems linked to more active coping, maybe less brooding, more acceptance.
So finding your role within the script, maybe?
Kind of. And for many, spiritual coping, drawing on religious ideas about destiny or God's will, is a huge source of strength and well-being. The analysis finds statistical support for that link.
So it really depends on how you believe it. What about resilience? Facing tough times. How does the analysis see destiny beliefs playing in?
It's an interesting dynamic. Usually a strong internal locus of control, believing you control outcomes, predicts resilience. But the analysis suggests certain fate beliefs can also help, like seeing destiny as something you navigate, or the Stoic idea of amor fati, loving your fate.
How does that help?
Well, attributing bad events partly to external fate can sometimes protect your self-esteem. It seems well-being might depend less on whether you believe in external forces and more on feeling you can still act effectively within that picture. The analysis helps clarify that nuance.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about balancing acceptance and action. How does all this connect to mental well-being overall, decision-making, behavior? What does the analysis show?
It's nuanced with well-being. General fatalism seems linked to more anxiety, especially after bad stuff happens, but more flexible or positive fate beliefs. They correlate with more meaning in life, higher satisfaction, less depression.
Okay.
Motivation-wise, fatalism often dampens effort. But believing in a destiny you can work with might actually boost persistence.
Interesting.
And in decisions, especially risky ones, beliefs about destiny and luck definitely play a role. Feeling lucky and believing you can navigate fate might make you bolder. Crucially, the analysis also stresses how much culture shapes all this.
Right. So what works psychologically in one place might not work the same way somewhere else. Very culturally embedded. Okay, let's zoom out to society. How does this belief function socially? Order, inequality, collective belief. The analysis looks at sociology too.
It does, yeah. It connects fatalistic views to social structures. Sociologists often see fatalism as believing outcomes are predetermined, limiting agency, leading to resignation.
Right.
Thinkers like Weber, whose work the analysis refers to, suggested rigid social systems can breed fatalism in people who feel stuck. And then there's that weird Weberian paradox again, Calvinist predestination anxiety, maybe fueling capitalism.
Right, the work ethic connection. What other sociological ideas does the analysis bring in?
Durkheim's ideas on anomie, even fatalistic suicide when social rules are too crushing. The analysis finds language linked to those states. He also talked about shared beliefs, including destiny, creating social glue. Marx saw alienation under capitalism breeding powerlessness and fatalism in workers. Another connection the analysis finds reflected in language about class.
So our social position can really shape whether we lean towards fatalism. How does that belief then affect things like conformity or challenging the status quo? The analysis must look at that.
It can cut both ways. Shared belief in a fated order might keep things stable, but if it leads to mass powerlessness, it can fray social ties. Fatalism might make people less likely to challenge norms. Why bother if it's futile?
Discourages rocking the boat.
Could do. Though Durkheim saw deviance as having social functions too. And Merton's strain theory suggests fatalism might fit certain responses to social pressure, like just going through the motions. The analysis examines how these sociological ideas show up in destiny talk.
So it can prop up the system or just lead to resignation. What about inequality and power? The analysis surely has something to say there.
Absolutely crucial area. Historically, saying social hierarchies are fated or divinely ordained has been a powerful way to justify inequality. If you believe your place is fixed, you might not question it.
Keeps people in their place, so to speak.
Potentially. But the analysis also finds times where belief in a collective destiny fueled social movements. Though that can also be co-opted, like manifest destiny again. Ultimately, the analysis suggests challenging fatalism is often vital for social change.
Right, breaking that it's just meant to be mindset can be empowering. How does this affect collective action more broadly, like political engagement? Does the analysis link fatalism to that?
Research, backed up by the analysis of social attitudes, suggests fatalism often predicts not participating. If you feel your actions don't matter, why protest or vote? Contributes to the silent majority idea.
Makes sense.
State repression can also make people fatalistic. But sometimes shared grievances and a strong identity can overcome that. Believing change is possible, the analysis shows, is the key antidote to fatalism in collective action.
It's a real tangle of individual belief, social structures, and group dynamics. Okay, shifting again. Scientific perspectives, physics, biology. How do they feed into this destiny and free will discussion? The analysis engages with science, too.
It does. Physics has really evolved on determinism. Classical physics, Laplace's demon, that was a clockwork universe idea. Theoretically, everything predictable, the analysis often finds this classical view cited in deterministic arguments.
Very rigid, no room for chance.
Right, but then quantum mechanics came along. Suddenly, there's fundamental indeterminacy at the smallest scales. Events are probabilistic, not certain.
Randomness built in.
That's the implication. The quantum wave function might evolve deterministically, but measurement outcomes seem random. The analysis highlights how this has been used to challenge strict determinism philosophically.
So quantum physics introduced uncertainty, but the analysis probably notes that doesn't automatically equal free will.
Exactly. Randomness isn't the same as willful choice. Many argue that point. Then you have chaos theory. Even deterministic systems can be practically unpredictable because they're so sensitive to tiny changes. The butterfly effect.
Unpredictable, but still technically determined.
That's the idea, yeah. The analysis points out chaos doesn't necessarily mean metaphysical indeterminism. So physics gives a complex picture, elements of both, but no final answer on free will.
Okay. What about biology? Genetics, epigenetics? How does that connect to destiny beliefs? The analysis looks there.
Yes. Genetics sometimes gets framed deterministically. It's in your DNA, like your genes are your fate.
A biological form of destiny.
Kind of. But then epigenetics really shook things up. The analysis highlights how talk about epigenetics emphasizes gene-environment interaction.
Epigenetics. That's changes in how genes are expressed, not the DNA code itself, right? Influenced by environment.
Exactly. Lifestyle, stress, diet. These can cause heritable changes in gene activity. So the message becomes, genetics is not destiny. It highlights biological plasticity. The analysis finds this point emphasized more and more.
So biology isn't totally fixed either.
Not in the way we used to think. But epigenetics doesn't eliminate determinism entirely. It just shifts it maybe to environmental or bodily determinism. The debate becomes about gene-environment interaction versus conscious choice. Some neurobiologists, whose views the analysis notes are influential, argue that once you account for all biological and environmental factors, maybe there's no room left for what we think of as free will.
So the source of determinism keeps shifting from gods to physics to genes to environment, maybe even quantum chance.
The constantly evolving picture, yeah.
Yeah.
The perceived forces change.
All right, finally, let's touch on AI. The analysis itself uses AI. How might AI interact further with these ideas about destiny?
Well, AI, especially large language models like the one behind this analysis, are incredibly powerful tools for mapping these beliefs. They can process huge amounts of text, find patterns, themes, cultural variations in how we talk about destiny. They can even model the logic in arguments for or against fatalism.
So AI as a superanalyzer of human belief systems, what could we do with that?
Potentially quite a lot. Insights could help people recognize their own fatalistic thinking patterns, maybe challenge them. AI could offer personalized info on different views of free will. It could even act like a logic tutor, helping you examine your own beliefs about fate and agency more critically.
Like a philosophical sparring partner.
Maybe. By dissecting arguments, showing logical strengths and weaknesses, AI could foster deeper understanding. It might also help us understand the psychological roots of destiny intuitions, linking language patterns to biases or our search for meaning. And it could present alternative philosophies like naturalism or existentialism as ways to find meaning without traditional destiny concepts.
Sounds potentially useful for self-reflection.
It could be, but there are ethical questions too, right?
Definitely. Like AI bias, imposing values, manipulating beliefs.
Exactly. Cultural sensitivity is huge. User autonomy. Avoiding oversimplification of deep existential questions. Not replacing human connection. The goal should be empowerment through understanding, respecting people's search for meaning.
Important guardrails. Wow, this has been quite a journey through the world of destiny beliefs. History, culture, philosophy, psychology, science, all viewed through this lens of the algorithmic analysis.
It really highlights that constant tension, doesn't it, between feeling things are fixed and feeling we make our own way. The analysis shows just how universal and enduring that tension is.
Yeah. And ultimately, the staying power of this belief in destiny, it seems so tied to those fundamental human needs, meaning, order, ways to cope with limits, finding our place somehow.
Which brings us to a final thought, really, for you listening.
Yeah.
Given all these different angles we've explored, the history, the science, the philosophy, your own feelings, how do you navigate that space between destiny and choice in your own life? It's a question that really gets to the heart of being human, isn't it?
This is DigitView.